If there's no further discussion on the ANS, it's now in order to consider amendments to the ANS to HR 556. I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Dingle number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Offering this amendment on behalf of Representative Dingle, and this is an amendment that would ensure that land managers can make science-based decisions that protect both wildlife and hunting opportunities. If we support our hunting and angling heritage, as we do, we should want these activities to remain sustainable and accessible for future generations. Hunters and anglers are some of conservation's greatest champions. They deserve our support. And the fact is, if land managers are able to follow the best available science, lead ammo and tackle restrictions can actually be a tool to help hunters and fishers have more access in more areas, not less. And this is because land managers, especially in the National Wildlife Refuges, must consider the compatibility of these hunting and fishing activities with the purposes of the refuge, including any impacts to threatened and endangered species in those units. This bill, as written, ties their hands by mandating expensive, unworkable, unit-specific, hyper-localized analyses before they can propose any prohibition or restriction on lead. In some cases, it will likely be easier and cheaper to just keep those units totally closed, to get to this thing we've been talking about, the carte blanche closure of hunting and fishing, instead of going through this arduous process that the bill sets up. Wildlife populations face multiple stressors: habitat loss, disease, climate change. Lead often contributes to declines alongside other factors, and waiting until it becomes the primary cause, or until you can meet this unattainable standard of proof that the bill sets up, means waiting until it's too late in some cases. So this amendment brings back the best available science standard to ensure that responsible management of wildlife populations and continued access for sportsmen and women is protected in these refuges. The amendment supports both conservation and recreation through sound science. I urge support for the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Wittman, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I go back to making sure we develop science and data around the specific places where there's a proposed ban on lead. We can't rely on data from a refuge unit in California to apply to a unit in Virginia. So why wouldn't we want this to be site-specific? We'd also want to know, too, is this a situation where it's lead from the use of sportsmen? Is there a remnant lead there that all of a sudden is making its way into the food chain? In this situation, none of that has to be part of the determination. It's, again, arbitrary. It's going in and saying, we give you the statutory authority at your disposal to make determinations about this without having to develop science, without having to look at the very specific situations of different ecosystems, animal, fishing and hunting conditions, the use of lead. All those things should be part of this decision. This is a complex decision-making that takes place on the activities of sportsmen, on the impact on wildlife, on the uniqueness of those land and water systems there. Yet currently, they don't have to consider any of that. They can just say, no, statutorily, we can do this. And that's what this is. It's the statutory allowance to do that. Why wouldn't we want to put some more rigor into the process? I hear my colleagues on the other side talk all the time about, we want science, we want scientific rigor, but only when it suits your arguments. When it doesn't, you say, well, no, let's give them carte blanche. I'm going to keep using that word. Let's give them carte blanche to make these decisions. The statute allows that. All this does is to say, no, there's going to be some rigor in how you make these decisions. That should be the responsible way to go about this. This bill actually promotes flexibility for the service and states to make localized policies and decisions, to put together all of the information. I want to make sure that, we are quantifying what is the risk here, quantifying what is the impact. We have an obligation to do that. Why should we be afraid of making sure that we have objective, science-based decision-making? It shouldn't only be when we believe that it achieves the ends that we seek. It should be in all situations. Listen, I'm a scientist by training. The scientific method is develop the science, question the science, make sure that you come to the conclusion in a very rigorous way. This is anything but rigor. This is saying you have the statutory authority to make these decisions however you see fit. And what we're saying is, no, let's be responsible about doing this. These are resources that belong to everyone. Everyone, we have an obligation to make sure that we make good science-based decision-making. And, you know, I just don't see how a science-driven agency like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Wildlife Refuge System can propose banning lead ammunition and lead fishing tackle when the effort itself clearly states that there's no substantiated data. And in instances, those actions have been taken where there's no data there, yet we're saying we're going to close these facilities down. All we're saying is that there needs to be data there to make that decision. I don't know why anybody would object to that, and to somehow say that this is irresponsible then denotes that any sort of objective assertion of data to make responsible decisions is somehow irresponsible. This bill, I think, is the most responsible way to go about this. The Dingell Amendment here limits that flexibility, it hamstrings coordination, and it makes this bill other than what it is, and that is about objective, science-based decision-making. That's what this is about, and that's what I believe will not be allowed under this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? No further discussion. It's an order